For 3 years, I was the invisible engine behind campaigns that printed money. When the company finally crossed 8 figures on a single launch, my boss took the stage, took the credit, and then tried to take my job. He didn't know my contract had teeth. Worse for him, I knew exactly when to bite. They applauded him like a headliner, and I stood 5 feet away holding the deck he didn't know how to present without me. My name was scrubbed from the opening slide, my notes distilled into his off-the-cuff quips, my data recut into glossy charts he couldn't read, and when the client asked a question about cohort lag, he looked to me the way you look toward a teleprompter you hope isn't broken. I nodded once, because I refused to let millions burn just to watch him sweat. And the room moved on. The contract moved forward, and my boss, Ethan Caro, a man who treated other people's work like a buffet, lifted a glass at the rooftop celebration and said, to my team, as if the preposition could replace my name. I had been here before, a strategist who turned dry products into demand, a ghostwriter of wins, the person who translated chaos into revenue while the face collected credit. But tonight, the numbers were obscene even by our standards. $12. Per million projected in 90 days, $3. 1 million already collected in week 1, and under the string lights, with the city humming like a secret we both kept poorly, Ethan leaned in close enough for his bourbon to touch my cheek and said the quiet part out loud. You're a star, Avery, but stars burn out. Stick close, I'll take care of you. I smiled with all my teeth because that sentence always means the opposite. At 7:12 a.m. The next morning, I walked into the office to find my access card demoted, my analytics permissions reassessed, and an HR calendar invite titled role realignment sitting in my inbox like a gun under a napkin. Ethan waved me into a glass box where the wallpaper was our trophies, case studies I wrote with his name on them, and performed the ritual with corporate anesthesia. We're restructuring around platform efficiencies. We need leadership that reflects our future. We're offering you a transition package. He slid a severance letter toward me with a number that might have impressed a rookie and a non-disparagement clause that would have muzzled a saint. Effective Friday, he said, voice smooth, eyes slippery. I read every line like it was a dare and set the paper down without touching the pen. Effective when? I asked. Friday, he repeated, kindly now, as if mercy were a service he provided. What he didn't know, what he could not know unless he'd read the red lines I'd negotiated 2 jobs ago and kept in my rider like a concealed blade, was that tucked between the boring indemnity paragraphs and the IP assignment was Section 14. Deauthorial and attribution reversion, a clause no glossy executive ever expects a strategist to ask for, let alone get. In plain English, it said this: if I am removed without cause from any account where I'm the named architect of a performance framework, the company agrees to A. revert authorship and public attribution of that framework to me, B. stop deploying it after a 30-day wind down, or C. pay me a license fee on every dollar it generates for 12 months. It lived quietly in my file, signed by legal back when I was scrappy, and we were nimble, grandfathered through reorgs because no one read what bored them. I drafted it after losing one too many pitches to men who took my decks and changed the fonts. I never thought I'd need to swing it like a hammer. Now Ethan had placed his thumb precisely where the hinge was weakest. I didn't show him the clause. Not yet. You don't point to the trap before the foot steps down. I closed the glass box door behind me, noting who was pretending not to watch, and took the long route back to my desk through the bullpen that smelled like new coffee and old ambition. People who DM'd me confetti last night kept their eyes on monitors as if eye contact could trigger liability. Slack chirped with a company-wide, so proud of this team, post autographed by Ethan's initials, the comments stacked with gifs of fireworks, a cathedral of performative gratitude. I didn't type a heart. I opened attribution logs. I pulled the change list on the campaign architecture, the skeleton that turned cold traffic into customers and first purchase into habitual ROI. My fingerprints were everywhere, the seed segmentation I designed after finding a hidden signal in browsing depth, the 2-voice email cadence that made both the CFO and the poet in me happy. The landing page split where lift came not from bigger buttons, but from a single line of plain-spoken copy nobody else would have written, because nobody else had stared into the comments of 1,000 unhappy users and come away with the 3 words they were begging to hear. I exported the evidence like a medic packing a trauma kit, timestamps, git commit hashes, Approval trails with my initials, before/after revenue deltas so clean a juror could understand them. Then I opened my contract and took a picture of Section 14D because I like to hold miracles before I use them. Ethan expected me to beg. He expected me to rage. He expected anything except what I did. Booked a 30-minute with legal titled attribution query, pinged our CFO, Lila, who trusted numbers more than narratives, and texted the client's CMO, a woman who once told me in a whisper over lukewarm wine that my frameworks felt like the first time anyone treated us like grown-ups. Quick question, I wrote. If the lead architect on your performance framework were removed, would you want to review continuity options? She replied with a single emoji, eyes wide, and then, call me at noon. Before noon, Ethan tried the nice version again, the mentor voice he wore like a jacket in spring. Nothing personal, he said in the hallway where the pictures make people behave. You'll land. Let me write you a recommendation. I thought about framing the sentence. You'll need it more, I said gently, and watched a hairline crack spider across his smile. At noon, the CMO didn't bother with pleasantries. Is this real? She asked. They're removing you after this week? I told her only what I could without burning the building before I'd moved my plants, that decisions had been made without consulting the person who built the engine, that I was considering next steps, that my priority, as always, was the integrity of results and the safety of her brand. She inhaled a curse I won't put on paper. If you go, we pause, she said. We'll put language in writing. They can't run your playbook without you. I didn't ask her to. I let silence do the work. Also, she added, softer, if you consult, we'll pay. I'd rather fund brains than egos. I thanked her and hung up, heat thrumming behind my eyes not from fear now but from the relief of being seen. At 12:31, Lila, CFO, called from a number I didn't recognize, which is how she calls when she wants deniability. Talk to me, she said. I walked her through the clause as if we were discussing the weather. She didn't gasp. She laughed, a single, delighted syllable. He really didn't read your writer, did he? We walked the math. If they fired me without cause, they owed attribution reversion or a license on every dollar generated by my frameworks for a year if they tried to skate by rebadging the work. I had the commit history and the archived Figma comments to prove lineage. What do you want, Avery? She asked, and the decency of the question almost undid me. I wanted what I always wanted, the work to be done right and my name not to be an afterthought. I want what we promised each other on paper, I said. And I want him to stop stealing women's weather. She went quiet in the way people go quiet when they're choosing a side they'll have to defend. Loop me on the email when you trigger it, she said. And, thank you for not letting the building burn. I drafted the notice with the precision of a bomb tech. Subject, Notice of Attribution Reversion, Section 14D. Body, crisp, bloodless sentences. I had been removed without cause. The framework known internally as Evergreen Delta and externally as the latter was authored by me, per the contract. The company must cease deployment after the wind down or compensate by a license. Please confirm by end of day. I attached exhibits, architecture map, commit hashes, approvals, before/after lift. I CC'd Legal and Lila. I did not CC Ethan. Then I did the pettiest thing I have done in my professional life and do not regret. I changed the Slack status on my avatar to a single paperclip emoji. People who know. At 3:04 p.m., Ethan stormed into my row like a storm you can smell before you feel. Have you lost your mind? He hissed, voice low because he knows how sound carries in a place built of glass. You think a cute clause is going to save you? I stood, not to loom, just to be fully my height. I don't need saving, I said. I wrote the map. He leaned in so close I could count the pores pride had widened. You're done Friday, he whispered. After that, I'll run your ladder without the rungs. I smiled, small and mean. Careful, I said. People get hurt when they climb something that isn't there. His jaw tightened. He walked away because men like him don't fight in rooms with witnesses. 5 minutes later, Lila replied all to my notice with one sentence that slid a tile out from under his feet. Legal will confer. In the interim, suspend new deployments of Evergreen Delta pending attribution review. Work stopped. Slack hissed. The world tilted. That night, under the sodium glow of my kitchen, I opened a new document and titled it simply, After Credit. Not a memoir. A plan. If they confirmed reversion, I would license my frameworks back at a rate that punished theft and rewarded competence. If they fought, the client would pause and the numbers would become a language even the board understood. If they fired for cause to dodge the clause, we would find out what cause they were willing to invent and whether HR wanted to hold that match. I set my phone face down. It buzzed anyway. A text from the CMO: "If they give you trouble, we'll name you in the case study." A DM from a rival agency: "You free to talk." A single-line email from legal at 11:58 p.m. "We acknowledge receipt. Please hold further comment until counsel convenes." Translation: they'd seen the blade. They were checking if it was sharp enough to cut through a man who never thought paper could draw blood. I rinsed my glass, turned off the light, and let myself grin in the dark because for the first time since the rooftop toast, I wasn't the ghost in the room. I was the author, and morning was about to read my name out loud. The next morning the office buzzed like a hive that knew smoke was coming, everyone pretending to type faster, talk louder, as though volume could mask the shift in air. But I felt it immediately. Ethan had launched his counteroffensive. Overnight, an email had gone out under his signature, effective immediately. All questions regarding Evergreen Delta should route to leadership, which was his velvet-gloved way of saying I'd been cut from the loop. My calendar was scrubbed clean, projects reassigned, invites revoked one by one like petals torn from a flower. People who used to lean over my desk for feedback suddenly walked faster past my row, afraid proximity to me might get them flagged. In Slack, Ethan posted a long, syrupy thread thanking the whole team for their dedication on Delta, tagging every junior analyst, but somehow forgetting me. It was a message not to me but about me: "You're erased." But erasure doesn't land clean when the evidence still breathes. And that's what he underestimated. That silence is not surrender, it's setup. I spent the morning watching, logging every move. The campaign dashboard still carried my fingerprints, the client's Slack channel still lit up with my name tagged in archived approvals, and the clause in my contract was still humming like a hidden engine. By noon, whispers became bolder. A copywriter DM'd me: "Hey, are you leaving?" "Ethan said you're transitioning out." A junior designer, braver, whispered in the kitchen: "He told us you burned out. Said you asked to step back." I almost choked on my coffee. Classic strategy: rewrite the story before the truth can walk in the room. My hands itched to slam receipts in the Slack general channel, but I reminded myself of the bigger stage. No one remembers who shouted in the hallway. They remember who presented in the boardroom. So I nodded, let the rumors circulate, and quietly built my arsenal. That afternoon, Ethan summoned me to his office like a king calling for a knight he intended to behead. He sat behind his glass desk, blinds half-drawn like he thought shadows made him intimidating, and slid another folder across the surface. "Non-compete updates," he said smoothly. "Just need your signature to close this out." I flipped through the pages, clauses that would ban me from working with half the clients I had personally brought in, restrictions so broad they'd bar me from consulting in the very field I had built expertise in. "Standard stuff," he added, sipping his bourbon like it was 3 p.m. on Wall Street. "Sign today, we'll process your severance by Friday." He smiled the smile of a man who thought leverage was his birthright. I closed the folder slowly, deliberately. "You should read my contract again," I said evenly, meeting his eyes. His smirk twitched, confusion creeping in at the edges, but he waved me off. "You really don't want to make this harder than it has to be, Avery." I stood, folder still in my hand, and said softly, "I don't think you realize you already have." Then I left before he could see my grin. That night I didn't go home. I went to the office archives, badge still active though my access had been clipped elsewhere, and dug through project logs. For hours, I pulled every timestamp, approval chain, and commit note that traced Evergreen Delta back to me. I exported decks with metadata intact, Slack exports where Ethan had tagged me for final sign-off, even voice memos from client calls where he had said out loud, "Avery's framework, Avery's model, Avery's ladder." My laptop hummed like a furnace, and by dawn, my folder wasn't just evidence, it was an arsenal. But it wasn't just about proving authorship. It was about exposing the rot, Ethan's false claims, his attempt to muzzle me with a fake non-compete, his erasure of a woman whose work had built the revenue he was toasting. The next day, cracks spread wider. The client's CMO, my ally, pinged me privately. "We heard you're being replaced." "Tell me that's not true." I typed, deleted, typed again, then settled on, decisions were made without me. But you should ask yourself, without me, do the results hold? Minutes later, she replied, if they force you out, we pause. My pulse spiked. That was leverage Ethan couldn't vary with spin. By evening, the CFO, Lila, messaged, board review coming. He's prepping a narrative. Be ready. I stared at the screen, adrenaline burning through fatigue. The trap was closing, but not around me. Ethan didn't know I had already secured a copy of the clause signed by legal, notarized, dated. He didn't know the client was watching. He didn't know the CFO was already skeptical. And he didn't know that every attempt to erase me only sharpened my proof. In the glass cage of his office, he thought he was building a coffin for me. In reality, he was hammering nails into his own. By the time Friday rolled around, I had been erased from every calendar invite, stripped from every Slack channel, and relegated to a desk that felt more like a holding cell than a workstation. Ethan thought isolation would break me. What he didn't know was that silence is where strategy sharpens. I spent every minute of that week assembling my case like a trial lawyer preparing for the verdict of her life. My folder, digitized and triple backed up, now held not only metadata, receipts, and approvals, but also a legal opinion from a friend in contracts who confirmed what Ethan had overlooked. Section 14D wasn't symbolic. It was enforceable, ironclad, and devastating. And the more Ethan maneuvered, the sloppier he became. He circulated internal memos crediting himself as chief architect of Evergreen Delta, forgetting that those same documents timestamped my authorship months earlier. He rehearsed pitches to junior staff, dropping buzzwords he didn't understand, making them snicker in group chats he didn't know I still had screenshots of. And he overplayed his hand with the client, insisting he could run Delta without training wheels, a phrase that made the CMO text me, "Did he just call you training wheels?" He's toast. Every attempt he made to erase me became another brick in the wall closing around him. But evidence alone wouldn't swing the blade. I needed timing, leverage, and allies. That's where Lila, our CFO, became more than just an observer. She called me into her office under the guise of expense reconciliation and closed the blinds. "I've seen the clause," she said quietly, sliding my own contract across the desk. "If you push this at the right moment, he doesn't just lose Delta. He loses everything. The board will have no choice but to side with you." My heart hammered, but I kept my voice steady. "Then the right moment is the board review?" She nodded. "Monday. He's planning to bury you then. Be ready." She paused, then added, "And don't thank me. Just make sure you survive this place. He's burned too many already." I left her office with a surge of adrenaline so sharp it felt like electricity under my skin. That weekend, I worked like a thief plotting a heist. I combed through the client contracts, highlighting clauses that tied payment to lead strategist attribution. I gathered every screenshot of Ethan's Slack messages crediting me in moments he thought wouldn't matter. I rehearsed the order in which I would drop the evidence. First the metadata, then the approval trails, then the contract clause like a guillotine blade. But I also knew I needed an audience beyond the board. So I met with the client's CMO over coffee in a quiet cafe downtown, sliding her a copy of the license clause. Her eyes widened. "If they remove you, they can't legally run the campaign without paying you directly?" I nodded. She leaned back, whistling low. "Then let me be clear, if they try to push you out, we'll stop Delta cold. And when the board asks why revenue froze, your name will be the only answer." It wasn't just support, it was leverage, clean and undeniable. Ethan, oblivious to the storm, spent the weekend bragging on LinkedIn about his framework, posting thought leadership drivel with buzzwords strung like beads on a string. I saved screenshots, noting the timestamps. He was digging his own grave in real time, and I was just documenting the excavation. By Monday morning, the tension was visible in every corridor. People avoided eye contact, the air felt charged, and Ethan strutted into the boardroom like a man about to crown himself king. I followed, folder in hand, pulse steady. He started strong, projecting charts that showed Delta's success, his name plastered across the slides like a watermark. "This is the future of our company," he said grandly. "And as its architect, I believe it's time we move forward without distractions." He glanced at me when he said distractions, smirking like he had already won. But he didn't notice the way Lila's eyes flicked to me, or the quiet buzz of my phone as the client messaged, "We're ready if you are." I stayed silent as he paraded forged glory, waiting for him to commit fully to the lie. And when he declared to the board that I was phasing out by choice and that he would be taking full ownership of Delta, I felt the room tilt. That was the moment. I opened my folder, placed it on the polished wood, and finally spoke. With respect, I said evenly, my voice slicing through his monologue, "That's not accurate. And I have proof." Heads turned, whispers flared. Ethan froze mid-slide. I didn't dump everything at once. I let the anticipation build. Evergreen Delta was authored, designed, and approved under my direction. The attribution logs confirm it. The commit histories confirm it. The client contracts confirm it. And per Section 14D of my employment agreement, I slid the clause into the center of the table. This framework reverts to me if I'm removed without cause. Which means you cannot legally run it without either paying me a license or ceasing deployment. The room erupted, questions, gasps, murmurs. Ethan sputtered, "She's bluffing, this is nonsense." But Lila was already flipping through the clause, nodding grimly. "It's valid," she confirmed. The chairman raised an eyebrow, glancing between us. "Is this true, Ethan?" he asked. Ethan stammered, reaching for excuses, but his voice cracked. In that moment, I saw the shift. The board no longer looked at him like a leader. They looked at him like liability. And I wasn't finished. I slid the client's written statement across the table. "And if I'm removed, the client will pause the campaign. Effective immediately." Gasps again. Ethan's face drained of color. He tried to snatch the papers, but I held them firm, meeting his eyes with the calm of someone who knew the game was already won. For the first time since this war began, Ethan was on defense. And I was just getting started. The boardroom felt like a courtroom the moment silence settled after my last words, the air taut with the kind of tension that makes every cough sound like a gavel. Ethan, red-faced and sweating under the fluorescent lights, tried to reclaim the floor with his trademark bravado. "She's twisting legalese," he barked, pacing like a caged animal. "This clause, this so-called Section 14D, is meaningless. We built Evergreen Delta as a team. I led. She executed." He slapped his palm against the table, trying to drown my calm with noise, but no one flinched. I waited until his rant burned out of breath, then I pulled the first stack of documents from my folder, metadata logs, each page time-stamped with my initials, showing exactly when and where every key framework element was authored. I slid them across the table, letting the papers whisper louder than his shouting. The CFO leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "These are internal logs. I've seen them myself. They're legitimate." Ethan's jaw clenched, his fists balling as though he could intimidate a spreadsheet. "Coincidences," he spat. I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I placed the next set, screenshots of Slack threads where he himself had tagged me for final sign-off, his own words crediting me as architect. The directors exchanged glances, murmurs building. "Fabricated," Ethan shouted, desperation cracking his voice. "She doctored these," but he faltered when the general counsel leaned in. "These came from our own servers, Ethan. Timestamps align. If they're doctored by us, and that's unlikely." A ripple of laughter, small, tense, ran around the table, not at my expense, but at his flailing. His mask was slipping, and everyone could see it. I pressed on, my voice steady as a scalpel. "Beyond authorship, you need to understand the consequence. Per Section 14D, if I'm removed without cause, Evergreen Delta either reverts to me or must be licensed. The client has already confirmed they will pause deployment if attribution is misrepresented." I pulled the signed letter from the client's CMO and slid it into the center of the table like the ace of spades. Silence detonated. Directors leaned forward, lips parting in shock. The chairman picked it up, scanning the bold signature. His face hardened. Ethan lunged forward, trying to grab the letter, but security had already shifted at the door, tension rolling like thunder. "She's colluding with the client," he shouted, veins rising in his neck. "This is sabotage." But his hysteria only made the truth sharper. I met the chairman's eyes and spoke clearly. "This isn't sabotage. This is accountability. The client values results and integrity. They refuse to bankroll lies." Ethan's voice broke, his once slick cadence reduced to sputters. He turned on me like a cornered wolf, sneering, "You think this makes you a hero? You're finished here. No one will trust you after this." But when I looked around, the faces staring back weren't skeptical, they were resolute. One director finally broke the silence. "Ethan, enough. We've heard enough. Still, I wasn't done. I opened my laptop, projecting onto the boardroom screen. There, in unforgiving clarity, appeared his LinkedIn posts from the weekend, him bragging about his framework, him weaving buzzwords into hollow narratives, all time-stamped after Evergreen Delta had been filed under my name. Side by side, I displayed the Figma comments. His looks great, Avery notes attached to every major decision point. Gasps. Whispers. A few directors shook their heads, stunned at the audacity. Ethan slammed his fist on the table, but the blow landed hollow, echoing his collapse. He was no longer the charismatic leader they once admired. He was a desperate man exposed, and everyone could see it. The chairman finally spoke, his tone like a hammer striking steel. Ethan Caro, effective immediately, you are suspended from duty pending termination proceedings. Legal and HR will coordinate next steps. Ethan's face twisted, horror and rage tangling in his expression. You can't, he started, but his words dissolved when two security officers stepped closer. This is my company, he roared, but his voice cracked, desperate, pathetic. No one believed him anymore. The chairman looked to me. Avery, we will need your continued cooperation to stabilize Evergreen Delta. Can we rely on you? My throat tightened, not with fear, but with vindication. Yes, I said firmly. But only if integrity leads from here. Ethan was escorted out, his shouts muffled by the heavy door closing behind him. The boardroom exhaled, a collective release of tension that left the air humming with relief and disbelief. I gathered my papers, my folder lighter than it had felt in weeks. I didn't smile, not yet. But inside, I knew the collapse wasn't mine. It was his. And it was only the beginning of my rise. When the door shut behind Ethan, the boardroom didn't erupt in cheers, it just breathed. Relief settled like dust after a storm, everyone blinking as though they had woken from a spell. For weeks, he had been the voice, the swagger, the presumed architect of success. And in 1 hour, that illusion collapsed into the truth. He wasn't the engine, he was the weight dragging us down. The chairman leaned forward, folding his hands. Avery, you've carried more than your share in this company. We want to make this right. For a heartbeat, I wanted to scoff. Make this right? After the humiliation, the whispers, the erasure? But instead, I nodded, because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives as quiet acknowledgement. I'll cooperate, I said, but not under the same conditions. Integrity has to be part of leadership, not just performance. They agreed, too quickly perhaps, but the tide had turned, and they needed me now. Over the next week, I watched the company shift in real time. HR scrubbed his name from documents, removing Chief Architect from credits where he'd planted himself like a parasite. The audit team confirmed everything I had presented, metadata, client contracts, attribution logs, all authentic, all mine. Legal sent me formal notice. Evergreen Delta could not be deployed without either reverting attribution to me or paying license fees per my clause. The board, seeing the numbers, chose the obvious option, my name restored as architect, my authority reinstated. And with that stroke, the erasure was undone. But undoing is not the same as forgetting. The whispers in the halls changed, no longer pity or suspicion, but respect edged with awe. Coworkers stopped me in the kitchen not to ask if I was leaving, but to say things like, I can't believe you kept that clause, and you gave us hope we could fight back too. My inbox filled with messages from women in other departments, some I barely knew, thanking me for proving that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. The client, true to their word, stood by me. We signed for results, the CMO told me on our next call. And results come from the person who actually built the framework, not the one who stole the credit. Her voice carried the sharp satisfaction of someone who had seen men like Ethan too many times. She signed an extension within the week, doubling our scope. Ironically, the same campaign Ethan had tried to own became the very engine of my leverage. I had feared the work would vanish with him, but instead, it flourished once his grip was gone. And Ethan? He tried to claw back. I heard rumors of him pitching himself as a visionary consultant to rival agencies, but LinkedIn receipts travel faster than lies, and the screenshots of his meltdown in the boardroom spread quietly through networks. Within a month, he was radioactive. Within 3, invisible. I didn't need to follow his downfall closely. My victory wasn't his destruction, it was my survival, my restoration, my ascent. When the dust settled, the board made me an offer, official promotion, expanded authority, a pay raise that nearly doubled what I'd been earning. But I hesitated. Not because I didn't want the recognition, I did. But because I understood something now. Contracts matter, yes. Evidence matters. But above all, knowing your worth matters. For years, I had let others put their names on my work, assuming credit would trickle down eventually. It never does. Credit isn't given. It's taken or it's defended. This time, I defended it. And I wanted others to know they could too. So I accepted the promotion, but on my terms. New policies for attribution, transparent approval trails, and a culture where work doesn't vanish under someone else's name. The chairman raised his brow at my conditions, then smiled. Consider them adopted. The first day my name appeared on a company-wide announcement, not as a footnote, but as lead strategist, I felt something uncoil in me. Relief, yes. But also pride. Not the quiet pride of doing good work unseen, but the blazing pride of being recognized for it. That night, as I walked through the city lights, my phone buzzed with messages from colleagues and even strangers. You proved contracts can protect us. You made him pay. You showed us how to fight. I didn't reply to all of them, but I saved them. Because one day, someone else would need to see them and believe. Months later, Evergreen Delta had become not just a campaign, but a case study taught at conferences. People quoted lines I had written, frameworks I had diagrammed, and this time, the name attached was mine. And though Ethan's ghost lingered, it didn't haunt me. It reminded me. Every time I saw those 3 words, architect, Avery Lane, I remembered the boardroom, the folder, the clause, the moment silence turned into my weapon. And here's the lesson I carry, the one I'll tell anyone who listens. Never underestimate the power of knowing your own worth. Never assume silence is surrender, and never sign a contract without a clause that protects your name. Because credit matters. Because your work matters. Because when people try to erase you, the sharpest revenge is to make them watch as your name rises higher than theirs ever did. Ethan once told me, "Stars burn out, Avery." He was wrong. Stars don't burn out when they know how to fuel themselves. I didn't just survive his betrayal. I turned it into my ignition.